Difficult to see. Always in motion is the future.
Hello everyone, so glad you could make it to the show today. I'm Matthew Curry, your friendly neighborhood astrologer, and this is Conquer the Universe with Astrology. In a few minutes we'll be talking to my very special guest, Susan Grace, and with her kindly assistance, you and I will build a better tomorrow. First, though, I'd just like to have a brief look at the major astrological forces kicking around here in the next week or so. We've got a couple of interesting things that might affect your mood, and one very interesting thing that you need to pay attention to. First off, it's going to be a very busy day astrologically on Saturday, as we have a full moon in Libra and Venus enters Taurus. Now, this puts a big emphasis on Venus in general this weekend, since, among other things, Libra is ruled by Venus, and Venus is particularly strong in Taurus, the sign that it rules. Now, I know that Venus has a very strong association with love and romance, and that is certainly true, but I want you to keep in mind that when you fall for someone, ideally you fall with all of yourself and all of your chart, and let's be honest here, you get into a relationship with another human being, no matter how awesome it may be at first, it's not always sweetness and light. So, yeah, and leave it to me. We got lovely love conditions as far as a full moon in Libra and Venus entering Taurus, and look at me coming along here to screw it up for you. Sorry about that, folks. I mean, look, let's be honest here. Those are great conditions for dating and writing thank you notes and going out for a good meal and generally being nice and pleasant to each other. But let me tell you what the potential downside is to this weekend is that if you are in a relatively new relationship, or if you're in a situation where you think that simply playing nice and being kind and accommodating is going to solve all of your problems, anything like that, I would warn you that this particular combination this weekend can be kind of deceptive. Now, don't get me wrong. I am a big believer in the power of love. But in a situation like this, it is possible to put entirely too much of an emphasis on that sort of thing. And, okay, sure, love one another. Be kind. That's awesome, all right? But don't over-accommodate the kind of crap that you shouldn't be accommodating at all, simply because Venus is in a nice place, you're feeling good, and who wants to rock the boat when the conditions don't seem all that stormy? Alright? Now, astrologically speaking, here is the great big thing to be watching out for in the next week or so. It's kicking in right now, but it's not exact until April 2nd. I am referring to Mars conjunct Saturn. Now, this is a really interesting situation because, alright, first of all, admittedly, if you're an astrologer or you're an astrology fan, there's always a bit of an urge to panic when you hear Mars conjunct Saturn, because after all, Mars is where your fight comes from, and Saturn is usually what you're fighting against. And both planets are particularly strong, what with Mars being the sign in Capricorn, being in the sign of its exaltation, and Saturn in Capricorn being in the sign that it rules. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be seeing a lot of that irresistible force, immovable object, headbutting type thing going on in the next week or so, but yeah, let's be honest, you're likely to be seeing a lot of that. Just try to make sure that you are neither the butter nor the butty in that situation. Butty. I like that word. It's not really a word. Butty. And of course, it is my solemn duty as an astrologer to point out that in general, for whatever reason, whether it's all that Venus stuff happening or the Mars conjunct Saturn aspect that's just kicking in now that's going to be in effect for the next week or so, in either case, it is my sworn duty as an astrologer to point out that if you are having difficulties in your life, if you're having a hard time figuring out your partnership, your relationship, where you want to go with your life, that sort of thing, I must inform you that if you write me at astrologyshow@gmail.com, I'll send you a free ebook, and I'll give you details on readings. And you know what? We'll figure this thing out together. And you know what? Even if I just like giving away free stuff, So, you know what? Even if you don't need the reading, just write me for the free ebook. It's 12 Signs of Love. You won't get it anywhere else, except for that shady-looking guy down the street who sells all sorts of things out of his basement, and you should maybe be just a little ashamed of knowing that's what he does. But I won't tell, all right? Anyway, information on readings, free ebook, and, why not ask for a discount on a reading? Just do it. See what happens. My email address is astrologyshow@gmail.com. Oh, and one more thing, interesting. I'm pleased to announce that my new website is mostly up. For a long time, I've kind of needed to have one central point of contact, and it's up now. There's just kind of a placeholder page there, but it will still give you the means to contact me. The address is, get this, mcastrology.com, as in MatthewCurryAstrology.com, except it's shorter. mcastrology.com. No, it's not micastrology.com, smartass. mcastrology.com. Now, having said that, let's build a better future, shall we? My guest today is, I've only known her for a little while, but in a short period of time, I've come to be very impressed with her caring, her concern, her empathy, and maybe as far as you're concerned, the most important part is her depth of astrological knowledge. And if you all will, put your hands together. I know it's a podcast, we can't really hear the applause, but go ahead, put your hands together anyway, and give a big welcome to today's guest, intuitive astrologer and writer, Susan Grace. Hello, Susan. How are you doing?
Hi, Matthew. I'm great. I'm glad to be here with you.
It's a thrill for me, too. First of all, can you tell us a little about yourself?
Sure. I'm an astrologer, obviously, and a writer. I'm the mother of Napoleon. If you follow me on social media, I've given my son the name Napoleon because I feel like he deserves his own privacy, and he's also short and thinks he's the boss of the whole world. And I don't know, at the moment I feel really dedicated to this astrology gig. I feel like it's my vehicle to participate in what I think is the ushering in of the end of suffering for humanity, and this is just kind of where I've shown up for it at the moment.
This sounds like a very worthy goal. In past I've had astrologers on the show, and I'm always interested to ask them, how did you become an astrologer? Because I don't think I've heard anywhere near the same answer twice. So what path did you follow to end up being an astrologer?
Well, like most people who are into astrology at this point, who were born in the 60s and 70s, I was following horoscopes through my mother whenever I was younger. But whenever I was getting older, teenage years and into 20s, I started on my own search for the answer to life, and I was real serious about finding it. And I dove into Christianity and Judaism and Kabbalah and Buddhism and philosophy and psychology, and I just kept going and going and going. I was determined to find the answer. And then I saw my chart in 2012 for the first time, and that changed everything for me. My whole world opened up personally on knowing myself and on how I understood people. And I think, as we all do, whenever we decide this is our calling, we dive headfirst in the charts and just kind of go manic with it until we feel like we've got it under our belt. And then I was a reluctant professional astrologer. I kept telling people I was not an astrologer. Every time somebody asked me, I would say, no, I'm not. And I would send them to other people. And then finally, a couple friends of mine had an intervention with me when I was on a radio show, when we were off air. And they're like, are you an astrologer? I'm like, no. And they said, I believe you are. And then I was like, all right, fine. I'm an astrologer. And it went from there.
You know, it's interesting because I've dealt with a lot of people recently who are in, I guess, what you could call calling denial.
Yeah.
And it's
go ahead. It's what?
It's a good thing. It's a good thing you had an intervention.
Yeah, I think that's what happens whenever you're being called into something, is it comes to find you. You don't really go to find it, and you don't really have a choice anymore. And I think that's kind of the best way, because I think when we're younger, we worry that we're going to miss our calling, And now on the other side of it, I can attest to the fact that you can't miss it. It's going to come find you no matter what.
Yeah, and it's I will, full disclosure to the audience, we've met. I've talked to you a fair bit. And I do realize that this is one of the things I wanted to ask you about, is that, and I'm going completely out of order with my questions, but one thing I wanted to ask you about is that, now if you know a lot of astrologers, you will find that one of them is really brilliant with, let's say, relocation astrology, and another one knows their ancient Hellenistic techniques up and down, another one rocks it at compatibility or whatever. I was not long ago, I was talking to you about the role of Lilith. Would you like to discuss that? Because I will admit, for as long as I've been doing this, I've been ignoring Lilith. We sort of sent her out of the garden and didn't talk to her again, and she's been raising mayhem ever since. That's a Lilith joke, people.
Yeah, so the quick and dirty on Lilith is that it's a suppressed biblical story. So Lilith was the first wife of Adam, and she was super strong, super powerful, super dominant, was not willing to submit to her husband. And so God said, if you're not going to submit to your husband, I'm going to kick you out of Eden. And she's like, go ahead. And so he said, oh, all right, I will. And then so he threw her out of Eden and into the underworld, where she became really pissed off and brooding. And who wouldn't? I mean, both God and man say, as a woman, you're too strong, and so you're evil. And so God kept going back to her and saying, if all you have to do is submit to your husband, I don't even know what you're doing right now. And she's like, I'll sleep in the bushes. I'm not doing it. And so she's remained cast out until now. There's several versions of Lilith in astrology. Black Moon Lilith is the version of Lilith that is being folded back into our oneness now, because there's no part of us that should be cast out or named as evil or exist in the shadows. And Lilith exists within everyone. It's not just women. It's men and women. It's the part of us that, when it feels like it's being suppressed or cast out or shamed, any of that stuff, it gets real pissed off. And we need to learn how to listen to Lilith now, because she gives us warnings. Like, you'll feel it in the back of your thinking. Like, you'll have a feeling of, oh, I don't like that guy. And it's her, and you need to be like, I hear you, I got it, I'm going to do something about it. She's not allowed to be in charge, because she doesn't give a shit. She'll burn the whole thing down. And so she can't be in charge, but at least we need to be listening to her, because we get to be whole. We get to have all parts of us intact.
Ah, yeah. Okay. And I think maybe this is where people get a little confused, is that there's 3 Liliths. Maybe 4 by now. No, there's 3.
Yeah, there's an asteroid Lilith. That's the Lilith that was cast out. There's the Lilith that's the calculated point in the sky, has to do with the moon's apogee. That's the Lilith that was in the underworld, pissed off and brooding. And Black Moon Lilith is a cluster in the sky. That's the one that's being folded back in now.
And it's kind of interesting, because I think ever since let's say the 1960s or so, there's been more attention paid to what is called the divine feminine. And I suppose that's as good a name for it as any. And I've always, here's the thing, I've always been, I don't want to say resistant to the idea. I think it's awesome. But somehow, let me put it to you this way. And when we look at something like Lilith in the birth chart, my concern is that I understand the idea that, okay, all of the planets except for Venus are named after dudes, okay? And that there is, consciously or otherwise, kind of a bias against the feminine in that. So, like, for example, in the 60s and 70s, you had a lot of astrologers looking at Ceres, Pallas, Juno, Vesta. And I'd like to get your opinion on this. I understand the function of those asteroids, but at the same time, I'm a little hesitant to get too into it, because those feminine qualities that they represent are good and true, but somehow saying, and now we have asteroids just for the girls, sounds a little too separate but equal to me, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Also, anyone who thinks that a woman doesn't have a Mars has not seen some of my relationships in past. But I'd like your take on that. Like, is it, we're all in the process of figuring ourselves out and balancing things out. And you may have noticed over the last few thousand years, women have gotten kind of a raw deal.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? So when it comes to integrating like the masculine and feminine worldview or whatever, um, how do we get past the idea that Lilith and the asteroids and all that are kind of the girl planets?
Well, we get past it by recognizing we're not just men and women. We have both masculine and feminine within all of us. I don't have any problem owning my Mars, and I don't think, oh, well, it's just associated with men. No, it's not. I have a really strong Mars, and I own it as a woman. I think we have to get past thinking that divine feminine is about the rising of women. No, it's not. Divine feminine is that we all get to heal. Divine feminine is that we get to build webs together. We get to solve problems. We get to come together instead of competing and annihilating each other. It's not men and women. That's a grave mistake to think of it in that way. And if we think of it in that way, we're going to shift from patriarchy all the way to matriarchy, and we'd have another disaster. It's masculine and feminine, and it's within all of us.
Meet the new boss, same as the old boss.
Right.
So, and you may have noticed along the way that we have certain, well, there's like those men's rights advocates, you know, sort of like, are you, I guess what I'm trying to say is, and this is something I put a lot of thought into when it comes to specifically addressing men with astrology, or the masculine or whatever, because you may have noticed as an astrologer, I don't understand why this is. There's a relatively even gender split among astrologers, but when it comes to the people who are talking to astrologers, it's like easily 90% women, at least in my experience. How, and I'm not expecting you to have one surefire answer to this, but if you do, please share with the audience. How do we as astrologers address that?
I have a good handful of men clients who are recurring clients, and I think that we have to understand that the liberation that's happening with humanity is for both men and women, and that patriarchy has hurt men just as much, if not more, than women, because men are having a hard time getting in touch with their own feminine, with their own emotions. They don't have as many resources, as many networks. They don't have people on their side being advocates for the way that they've been hurt by society as well. I love reading for my men clients because I'm like, listen, man, you've been screwed over. And they're like, thank you, right? I'm like, yep. Yeah. It's all of us. All of us are going to have to understand that this is a liberation of humanity. All of us are going to be healed one way or another, says Regulus in Virgo as of 2012.
That's interesting because I've thought about this, and when I am reaching out to male clients or to potential male clients, I understand, I fully accept the value of everything you're saying, except when I'm talking to them, it's more sort of like, dude, this is going to give you a strategic advantage. Do you want that or not? Yeah. So you think we're not talking to women that way? Here's how you can get them to listen to you, all right? Yeah. Yeah. We talk to everybody that way. There you go. So I guess part of the rising of the divine feminine and understanding things like, say, Lilith in a birth chart, it is all sort of a part of evening things out, making it equal. Well, I mean, if you find that necessary, but when I'm in a chart, I do not look at the planets or the luminaries as masculine and feminine. I look at them as energies. Yeah. It doesn't even cross my mind to say we're underrepresented here. It never crosses my mind ever. I have yet to see a Y chromosome in a birth chart anywhere. That's right. And I think, honestly, when it comes to addressing men and their current issues with how the world is going, I think it's a little like, I'll put it to you this way, it's a little like the white folks in South Africa after apartheid went out, and they were all worried they were going to get slaughtered. And I think maybe we need a little truth and reconciliation ourselves, all of us. Yep. And astrology, I think, can really do that for people. So please, for God's sake, everyone write today for a reading. How was that? Well, and let's be clear about what truth and reconciliation means. That means that the system itself is what needs to be dismantled, not that we need to declare each other as enemies. And it means everybody needs to come out from the system and talk about what they've seen, what's gone on, how they participated, so we can all heal from it and dismantle the system itself. And reconciliation for how much damage it's done. Yeah, I think that's a good point. And a lot of this, I mean, if we want to look at how all of this, which all sounds very fine and psychological and all that, but how it plays out in the actual practical material world, I think we have to look at where Saturn is at right now. You may have noticed it's in Capricorn. You have noticed, everyone's noticed that. Anyone who follows astrology, it's kind of like, oh my God, Saturn's in Capricorn and we're all going to die. Just like the world went to an end like 27 years ago, the last time Saturn was in Capricorn. But I'll tell you what, this time around it feels different somehow. Is that because Pluto is there? What's your take on Saturn in Capricorn specifically?
Yeah, it's definitely Pluto. So if you don't follow astrology real closely, Pluto, the last time Pluto was in Capricorn was when the U.S. Signed the Declaration of Independence. And it happened in the U.S.'s chart. It happened in the second house, about money. So Saturn's on approach, and Saturn's going to cross Pluto in 2020. The last time both Pluto and Saturn, just those two, were in Capricorn, I think was the 16th century. Is that right? I think it was the Renaissance, wasn't it?
Yes. Offhand, I don't recall, but yes.
And then Jupiter is on approach, and so Jupiter will be in Capricorn when Saturn crosses Pluto in 2020. And the last time that happened was, I think it was the Crusades, so the 16th century.
Okay.
And so these haven't happened in hundreds of years, and it's not just that. It's that during the same time that that's happening in Capricorn, we have other shifts that haven't happened in centuries, like Neptune and Pisces. It was right before the Civil War, and Chiron going in between Pisces and Aries happens around liberation movement, so around in the 20s and the 60s, 70s, and then Uranus going into Taurus was before World War II. But all those were during times whenever we were in the darkest part of our orbit from consciousness that we get from Sirius. And it was when Regulus was in Leo. So, I think people get all worked up about, oh God, it's the end. No, this is the beginning. This is the beginning. Says Regulus in Virgo, says our orbit from Sirius. That the Mayans knew what they were talking about when they said that we enter into a new cycle in 2012. They were right.
I think that's a good point. And I think, go with me on this, we'll get to Chiron in a minute. But when we have all this happening, and even if we aren't astrologers, even if we don't know or care about it, I kind of get the feeling we can feel something coming, that you were going to have Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto all in Capricorn. And when that is happening, we're also going to have Chiron in Aries. And that, I think, for a lot of people, and I'll admit there's a bit of this on my part too, is that if I want to show off my classics of English literature skills here for a minute, okay?
Okay.
It's an obscure work, but some of you out there listening may be familiar with Gremlins 2. And there's this scene where the Gremlins have invaded New York City, and they've taken over this investment banking firm. And one of the Gremlins is answering the phone from a client, and he says, We're advising all of our clients to invest heavily in shotguns and can openers. And I get the feeling that a lot of people have a feeling that that's kind of what's coming. I mean, if you look at it, the world has been ending since it started from some people's perspectives. It hasn't yet, and I'm betting against it personally. But I kind of think that for all that's going on, I think understanding Saturn in Capricorn may be the key to it. I kind of can't help but think that it's not coincidence that of all the bodies we use in astrology, Saturn is the one that's furthest from the sun, yet still visible.
Right. But I would also consider that right before these shifts happened, with Saturn entering into Capricorn in December, we had a cluster of placements around the galactic center. So right before all these levers started being pulled, Saturn at 29 Sagittarius, which I think Sun, Mercury retrograde, and Venus were all there, if I'm not mistaken. I might be. It was all those clustered around the galactic center before these shifts start, said the galactic center is the eye of God, the vision that God has for humanity. It said, you must be willing to stand up for what you truly believe in, because the beliefs you hold are going to dictate the world you live in. And at the time, I was thinking, okay, Saturn, got it. God damn, we've been talking about this for 2.5 years. And I felt it going, no, you're not listening. Like, for real. You're going to have to stand up for what you believe in. It will dictate the world you live in.
And it's interesting because there are a lot of people who, right around that time, right before Saturn entered Capricorn, there was, it seems like, an unusually large number of people having one way or another very big, very life-changing experiences. Now, two things about that. First of all, just from an astronomical viewpoint, Saturn has a tilt to its axis like every other planet. And Saturn, when it was passing through the tail end of Sagittarius over the galactic center, was, and still is, at the part of its orbit where, from Earth's perspective, if you're looking at it through a small telescope, you can see the rings most clearly, but the effect is Saturn almost looks like a big eyeball staring at you.
Mm.
And I kind of get the feeling that there's a line in the Bible about how his eye is on the sparrow, and I think we're in a time now when it's like Saturn's looking at you, pal, and I think people are really feeling it. And a lot of us went through some very big stuff right around that time. And even though Saturn has changed signs, we are still dealing with the, okay, that happened, now what phase.
Right, but let's go further. In 2020, when Saturn crosses Pluto, North Node's in Cancer.
Oh.
That means South Node is in Capricorn.
Okay.
And so it's saying, I think, and I guess we'll know when we get there, I think it's saying, don't you run back into old structures that keep you suppressed. Don't do it. Go out into your freedom where, yes, you will feel very, very vulnerable, but you've got to find a way to feel at home and comfortable in the world and stand up for what you truly believe in, even though you don't have old rules and old structures backing you up. Don't run back into this thing that's coming down. Go build a new world.
I think this is good for people to know, even if they're just listening to this now and this is the only time they encountered any astrological concepts. I think it's just good to know this is happening and this is coming.
Yeah, because when the macro changes are happening in the world, and my personal philosophy is that the astrology never sets us up to fail, ever, and that it never sets us up to fail. When we are having macro changes in the world that are introduced by the galactic center saying, go out there and stand up for what you truly believe in. During the time that the world is changing, the North Node is in the energies of finding our individual humanity again. It's going to be in Leo. It's going to be in Cancer. It's going to be in Gemini. Find your heart, be vulnerable and care for each other, and trust your own thinking. Do not fall into detaching or old structures or dogma.
And
so we approach the macro changes through the micro.
And I think what in a lot of ways is going to pull this together is Chiron in Aries. And and also oh god. And a lot of people of course are going to be having their Chiron return when that happens. Mm-hmm. What's that mean for people?
Well, so, like I said, when Chiron changes from Pisces to Aries, it happens around liberation movements. So why? Why does that happen? And I think it's because Chiron goes into Aries, and it makes us look at and therefore heal how we've hurt ourselves and each other as humans. We've used our inner masculine or our power or our ego, or however you want to look at it, to hurt ourselves, to be mean to ourselves, and to destroy things. And when Chiron comes in to heal that, we start to mend ourselves and liberate people. And so I think that when Chiron goes into Aries in April, it's going to be there until September, and then we'll retrograde back into Pisces from September to February. My read on that is that Chiron's going to go into Aries, and everybody's going to go, oh, God, look at what we've done. And there's going to be some shame that comes up at first. And so Chiron will go back into Pisces and go, okay, now that you thoroughly feel like shit about yourselves, let's remind you that you're not meant to stay in suffering. You're meant to heal up out of this. So go handle your wounds, heal out of this, do better, liberate people.
This is all, it's interesting because it's kind of, A lot of people object to astrology because it's fatalistic, and of course, you know that astrologically there is a way that a person, either with their own birth chart or as an astrologer, can play that hand. It's sort of like, this is your birth chart, this is what you were meant to do. You're ugly and your mother dresses you funny because the birth chart says so. And that's it. But this is, I think, everything we've talked about here is a really good example of how actually understanding your birth chart, getting a reading, that sort of thing, can actually be really liberating.
I completely disagree with any reading of any chart ever that says, here's where you're super screwed. Okay. No.
Oh, I thought you were going to say you disagreed with me and we're all screwed.
No, I agree with you.
Okay, good. Oh, that's good. Okay. Because that would have blown the whole premise of my statement. So now, when you do a reading for someone, I know everyone who's an astrologer, even if they're on the same page with the techniques and the philosophy and all that, everyone does it differently. When you're doing a reading for someone, what's it about? Like, what do you do for them? Suppose I come to you for a reading and say, hi, I hate my job and my love life sucks, blah, 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 the usual thing. No one ever says blah, 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 by the way. I've yet to have one of those. I think, you know what? I'm going to announce right now a discount on the next reading for someone who writes me with the subject line blah, blah, blah. Anyway, what do you do personally in the course of a reading? Where do you start? What do you look at? What can you tell us about that?
I come at it from an angle of, you're perfect. You were created exactly as you were meant to be created, and the astrology within your chart has the best intentions for you. And there may be challenges in there, but the intent is always to help you to grow. So I get into the chart. It's like I'm standing in the chart, Matthew. I'm standing in the chart looking around going, what has everybody got to say? And I go all the way through the chart. I read every aspect, every placement. I show them what the planets are doing during different phases in their lives. And I helped them to figure out how to get out of the log jams. Because, you can get into tough squares where people are like, I feel like I'm never going to get out of that. And I'm like, yes, you are. We're going to figure it out. That I think it's important. Well, this is just my opinion, but I think it's important for astrologers to be advocates for their clients, to get in there with them and say, listen, you were created exactly as you should be created. Let's figure this out for you. Because that's the whole point of knowing your chart. It's the blueprint of your life. And it has lessons in it that act through the planets. Planets are people. I say often in readings, like, you're going to be delivered your lessons from the planets through people walking into your life. And know that it's not personal. It's not a curse. That there's something very intentional happening to you. And if you know what's happening, then you can work with it and not against it.
That's a really, I gotta tell you, just honestly, just between me and you and anyone else who's listening, maybe. I've found all this really interesting and really useful, and I think it could do a lot of people a lot of good knowing these things. And I find myself wishing there wasn't some way you were available on a more regular basis, like with a phone app or something. Have you ever thought about that?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I have, Matthew.
Oh, that was a setup, people. Anyway, do tell me about this. My friend Darlene from XOX Darlene and I are about to launch an app. Yeah.
Sorry?
She does good work.
Yeah, so she and I do, if you follow us on social media, we do live hangouts together, and we've taken that and expanded it into an app. So the notifications to join live to our hangouts will be on the app. I'll be sending out push notifications in real time whenever the astrology shifts, like, something just happened in Aquarius, don't lose your mind or whatever. That'll happen in real time. We're going to go and take the hangouts on tour to cities around the country. So the announcements for those cities will be in the app. And there's going to be a blog type feature where we have ongoing commentary about whatever's going on in the collective. And we're going to have guest speakers and pop-ups too. And a dedicated members only for the app Facebook page where everybody can go in and talk amongst each other about whatever topic happens to be on fire in the astrology as we're talking about it.
This sounds really cool. Where, when, and how do I get my hands on such a thing?
Well, follow my Facebook page and my website. So I'm under Susan Grace, obviously, on Facebook and on Instagram, and then my website is susangrace.org. We're going to announce it. We've been waiting on the final. You have to get your apps approved for them to be on iTunes and that kind of stuff. So we're waiting for the last push on that to come through. I'm expecting to launch within about a week. It might be a week and a half. So we're almost there, but definitely we're going to announce it all over the place as soon as we're ready. So friend me or follow me on social media, or you can sign up for my newsletter from my website.
Right on. And the website again is, what's the name of it?
SusanGrace.org.
SusanGrace.org. Finally, there's one thing, whenever I have someone on here, I like to ask them one question that's very specific to their life or their expertise or whatever. Now, in your case, I couldn't help but notice that your Facebook page, the actual address for your personal Facebook page, is facebook.com/doublescorp. And you know at least as well as I do, that there are certain cliches that come with every given sign. And you are its sun and, if I may, do I get to throw out personal details about your chart?
Go ahead, yeah.
Sun in the first house in Scorpio. And given the cliches that come with every given sign, what can you tell us that we're getting right about Scorpio, and what are we getting wrong?
Well, Scorpio is definitely intense. I don't know about. I think Scorpio gets associated. I've seen people associate Scorpio with deception and with secrecy, but I'm telling you that Scorpio is after the truth, and that Scorpio will do anything to get to the truth. It's very uncomfortable when it's dealing with untruth. Scorpio is in charge of boundaries. It doesn't like doing it. It hates doing it. It's doing the work that nobody else wants to do. So although Scorpio is in charge of boundaries and they're known for it, Scorpio will wait and wait and wait and wait to draw a boundary. And they're like, oh, God, don't make me do it. And then, it always happens that people make them do it. And they get pushed too far, and they end up drawing boundaries. And they don't want to do it because they know I come across as scary or afraid that I'm going to kill off something that deserves to live, or I'm going to make an intense call and forgot to ask how people feel. But it's a reluctance. Scorpio doesn't like having to do that. And in fact, whenever Scorpios lash out, it's because they are afraid that something awful is coming, and they're trying to beat it to the punch. I think that what people probably need to understand about Scorpios is they're way more sensitive and vulnerable than they let on. That all of that stinging and intensity and control is trying to avoid awful and hurt from happening. And we just go too far because we're scared.
Well, it's funny because I don't know that I've ever, and I mean there's exceptions to every rule, but my experience with Scorpio in general is that they are not deceptive. They could probably stand to be more deceptive sometimes. But it's sort of like, when you're dealing with a Scorpio, it's sort of like, oh, what's that sudden feeling in my chest? Oh my God, you really do love me. Or, oh, what's that sudden feeling in my chest? Oh, that is a steak knife. And
yeah.
So I mean, Sagittarius kind of has the reputation for telling more truth than they should. As I said in my book, Sagittarius is the kind where the wife turns to the husband and asks the classic, "Does this outfit make me look fat?" And Sagittarius is the one that says, "I love you, fat ass, babe." But with Scorpio, it would be more sort of like, yes, but I enjoy it.
Right.
So,
right. I will say also that Scorpio, I don't know if everybody wants to let on about this, but my experience with Scorpio is they secretly really love having Sagittarius around.
Really?
Because Scorpio, oh yeah. Scorpio feels like it's giving death a piggyback ride all the time. And Sagittarius is like, no, you're not. It's like reminds Scorpio to have fun.
I think it's a surprisingly good match.
Me too.
Also, I don't know if I mentioned this recently or not, but I am in love with the Scorpio.
Oh, well, lucky you.
A double
and lucky
Scorpio,
her.
no less. Yeah, well, we'll see about that. But, I mean, it certainly seems to be a good thing from my perspective.
I think she would agree.
Okay, good. We'll perhaps have an anonymous poll later on that and see how that's really going. But so anyway, it's been fantastic talking to you. One more time, where do we find you?
So I'm under Susan Grace on Facebook and Instagram, and SusanGrace.org.
That's good. So sign up. There's somewhere you can slap your name down and say, hey, hit me up with this app or something.
Yeah, it's coming. It's imminent. It's on its way.
Right on. Intuitive astrologer and writer Susan Grace, it has been very good talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew.
That was great, wasn't it? Susan Grace, everyone. I hope you'll come back next week. Now, I don't know whether or not I'm going to have a guest next week or not. Believe me, though, if I'm going to have a guest next week, it's going to be a good one because I'm not skimping on the quality guests with you here, people, all right? Regardless of who the guest may be, though, I do hope you come back because we'll be covering what I think is probably the single most important astrological aspect that is coming up in at least the next couple of months. And if you play along with it and you pay attention, it's going to give you an exciting sneak preview of some of the stuff that's happening in the next 2 to 3 years of your life. That's right. There is an aspect coming up that has a direct bearing on both the upcoming July solar eclipse and the occasionally dreaded and occasionally misunderstood Saturn-Pluto conjunction that's happening at the end of 2019, early 2020. So believe me, for your own sake, you don't want to miss it. I hope that didn't sound too intimidating. Anyway, if you'd like information on a reading, if you'd like a free copy of my ebook, 12 Signs of Love, here's what you do. You send me an email at astrologyshow@gmail.com, and why not drop by and say hi to my brand spanking new website, mcastrology.com. It's like Mick Astrology, except without the added fat and sodium. Anyway, hope everything's going great for you. If not, let's try to make it better. One way or another, as always, it doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter where you are, it doesn't matter what sign you are. Whatever the case may be, good night, Susan. I love you.